Good evening, Moonscouts. I'm your troop leader, Bunnie, and welcome to Campfire Tales. Come sit close to the fire and listen to what I have in store for you tonight. Lost King of Eden, written by RCain Tales. Decades long of scholarly research has finally bore fruit, and I have found the lost connection between God and mankind. The Garden of Eden written in Genesis was not allegory for the fall of man to original sin, nor even a story of the first man and first woman, but a historical account of the exiled King Adam. It was in Jerusalem where Adam ruled Eden, the very garden of God himself, and Adam was his humble gardener. But it sat under the heavy thumb of the Babylonian Empire as a vassal state, and they demanded heavy tribute from Eden. Adam, in his arrogance, denied the empire its tribute, and the Babylonian king marched into Eden, setting the garden ablaze as well as man's connection to God. But the time has come to restore that connection. A recent archaeological discovery unearthed the written words of a prophet of Judah, that the heir to Eden may recover Adam's crown from his resting place and reconnect God to his children. Of course, it also speaks of the serpent of Stygia, which rests in the tomb guarding the crown. This very serpent may have inspired the writing of Samael, the serpent in the garden which tempted Eve. But I believe it to be a remnant of the snake cult that persisted as healers in the old Jerusalem temple worshipping the great bronze serpent, Nehushtan. The worship must not have lasted after Moses' revelation of the commandments of the one true God. The prophecy by the man of Judah was dismissed as a mere museum piece by my more skeptical colleagues. But I believe to have found the heir to Eden himself, a fellow believer named Eliot Ben-Hadad. He could see the handwriting of God, invisible to mortal eyes, which proved to me that he was the key to Adam's tomb. We made the necessary provisions before setting out on our journey toward the Andera temple ruins in Syria, where our combined research pointed to the aforementioned tomb. Lastly, before leaving the comfort of civilization, we said prayers, I in English and he in Hebrew. Our trip was made much less arduous than it may have been for the ancient peoples, thanks largely to our modern modes of transportation. Andara seemed a desolate ruin in contrast to the verdant trees that dotted the desert around it like an apple farm. The blasted stone and clay showed hints of mighty cherub guardians and eroded reliefs of chimeras. We stood by the massive footprints left by Ishtar as she took her steps into her temple. There, Eliot received his first clue, revealed at the altar where the footprints led. The travelers wearied from her journey. The king is generous host, said Eliot. For myself, the second piece of the puzzle lay in the footprints. A guest of high stature may have their feet washed after a long journey. I can only imagine a guest that could humble a king would be a goddess, I said. I pulled out a canteen and gave it to Eliot, motioning him to pour water over the footprints. He sprinkled over the one nearest the altar. Nothing. Then the first step. Still nothing. Finally, as he poured water over the two standing prints, dust flew out from under a single tile. It took our combined strength to remove the block, but there unveiled a secret passageway into an underground tunnel beneath the temple. Using the rope tied to a sturdy nail embedded deep into solid earth, we climbed down into the pitch-black tunnel. I tried lighting a flashlight, but to no avail. Eliot saw the message inscribed in the darkness. Through faith alone can you find the light of God, he said. I was at a loss this time, but thankfully Eliot seemed to have this figured out all on his own. He apparently could see a trail leading through the tunnels. Eliot took my hand to guide me, as he would a true and trusted friend. It was this moment I had never felt more honored to aid the future king in his quest for his crown, to lead mankind back to God. As my eyes adjusted to the blackness, it became clear this was no mere test of blundering in the dark, but an impossible labyrinth, filled with long passageways leading to more passageways, which in turn led to nowhere. Even with the aid of artificial light, navigating it would prove to be impossible. Only the heir to Eden would know the way by the invisible trail of crumbs. At last, on the other side, my flashlight suddenly lit, as bright as if the batteries were freshly changed. We gasped at the light suddenly revealed, a massive statue of Asmodeus, each of the three heads with open mouths, indented with empty slots on their tongues. The serpentine head of a tail coiled around its body. The rough stone demon was dreadful to behold, yet even more so were the millennia-old remains that surrounded the room. I surmised that these were in fact the very architects of a labyrinth that could not escape their own creation. About the wall were 9 pedestals, each housing a tablet with a single word in ancient Assyrian text. I assisted in the translation and read them to Elliot. Dove, dragon, earth, king, library, star, sword, tree, and woman, I said. Elliot received his next instructions at the feet of the statue. Asmodeus has 3 questions for the King of Eden, Elliot said. The serpent shall act as messenger. Touch its tail, I told him. He placed a hand on the serpent's head and spoke aloud the riddle it whispered to him. The bull inquires, 6 points toward David, 5 points toward Babylon, 1 point towards the heavens. It became clear to me our goal was to find the correct tablet and place it into the empty slot of Asmodeus' bullhead. Are points in reference to a sword, I asked, like a declaration of war between Jerusalem and Babylon? Or the earth? Points in terms of places on a map, Elliot countered. But how does that account for the point towards heavens? I asked. It seemed like it should be simple, given our riddles have the answers laid out before us, and we need only pick the correct ones. Perhaps it was the anxiety that compelled Elliot to pull out his necklace that adorned a tiny Star of David, gripping it tight and praying. At that very moment, the answer became as clear as day. Star, I cried. Star, Elliot smiled. Of course. Relief washed over his face. 6 points for the Star of David. 5 points for the pentagram. 1 point for the stars in the night sky. I directed Elliot to the star tablet and he placed it in the bull's mouth. Nothing happened. Only silence. Touch the serpent again, I said. He did so and spoke aloud a second riddle. Clearly, we would not get our results until all 3 were answered at once. The man inquires, from this seed grew knowledge. From this seed grew life, from this seed grew realms. Ellie and I became more confident of our knack for puzzles. We concluded on the woman tablet and the female is the vehicle for life. She brings man into the world who spreads knowledge and builds homes, kingdoms, and realms. Elliot placed the woman tablet in the mouth of the human head and placed his hand on the serpent for the last time. We're so close now, I said. The sheep inquires. The beast flies by 2 winds. On the west wind, it carries away hordes of treasure, and on the east wind brings bountiful harvest. And there it is, I said with unimaginable glee in my heart. It was so simple. Dragon. Just a few moments before the crown is yours and God returns to mankind. Which one is it? Elliot asked. That one, I pointed. Dragon. The hordes of treasure line practically gave it away. Elliot joyfully rushed to retrieve the dragon tablet from the sheephead's mouth. Thinking of dragons reminded me of the simpler times and the lectures on theology my old professor taught at the university. The dragon of Western tradition was a symbol of greed and treacherous lords hoarding treasures such that it would be of no use to anyone, including the dragon itself. In the Eastern tradition, however, the dragon was the bounty of the river and the bringer of good fortune. My mind trailed off to more comparisons between the East and West, the Buddha and the Christ being one and the same, both having eaten from the tree of eternal life. Trees were a very prevalent symbol in cultures around the world, like the tree Drazel of Norse legend, the tree whose branches contain all the realms. Wait! Stop! I screamed as Elliot's hand was inches from the serpent's head. The second riddle is tree! In our pride, we had nearly ruined our chances of retrieving the crown, just as Adam had severed man's connection to God. Are you sure? Absolutely sure? Elliot asked. No doubt in my mind, I said. The tree of realms, Drazel, the tree of life, Bodhi tree, the tree of knowledge, Garden of Eden. I wouldn't have guessed, said Elliot. This is why God brought us together, I said. Elliot replaced the woman tablet for the tree tablet in the human mouth. He reached once more for the serpent head, but hesitated. I'm sure it's correct, I promise you, I said. I trust you, he said. He clasped his hands together in silent prayer. I kissed my crucifix in response. Finally, like a leap of faith, he firmly pat the serpent head, and no sooner did Asmodeus begin to move. We were taken aback at first, thinking we failed, until a passageway revealed itself behind the statue. I helped Elliot to his feet, and we both leaped in joy and hugged each other tightly. The way was open, and once more the tunnels began to brighten, like God himself was illuminating the way for my humble mortal eyes. As we entered, Elliot paused to find 2 messages above artifacts on either side of us. To the right was a dagger, and the message was clear of any prose or of obfuscation. With the dagger of Abraham, you will slay Nehustan, the disobedient servant of God, said Elliot. I didn't want to believe it, that the great serpent of Stygia was real, or even the very same Nehustan, worshipped by the snake cult as a false god. We could be walking to our deaths, Elliot, I said. If this monstrous serpent is real, it could be the fight of our lives. Look here, said Elliot, pointing to the opposite wall. There was a tall staff in the shape of a straightened wood serpent. With the staff of Moses, shed the dead flesh and reawakened by the glory of God, he said. This is the staff that Moses transformed into a snake before King Ramses' eyes. It's a healing staff, said Elliot. I am meant to die so that you will resurrect me. I looked at Elliot with deep concern. You were right. That God had brought us together, he said with a hand on my shoulder. Elliot took the dagger and I the staff. We steadfastly marched to the door at the end of the passageway that could only lead to Nehustan, our final test. I opened the door and a waft of foul air invaded the hollowed hall we still remained in. It was darker than the room of Asmodeus, darker even perhaps than the labyrinth, only this time my flashlight functioned properly. We tread carefully inside with Elliot taking the lead, me providing the light in finding our enemy. There was a subtle skittering sound and Elliot proceeded to follow it. I trailed close behind him, ensuring his path was lit. We stopped dead at the sight of a single scaly bronze tail. I slowly scanned along the tail to find where it may have ended. At last, I found a massive coil, the serpent reaching nearly 80 feet in length. This was truly a beast out of legend, a freak of nature. I signaled Elliot that I was ready to play my part. He crept silently upon the sleeping serpent. My flashlight shone hundreds of skittering bugs on the ground that also fearlessly crawled around Nehustan. Elliot was careful to avoid crushing the bugs when he could, not to disrupt the constant sound that lulled Nehustan to sleep. Elliot was wide-eyed when he was arm's length from the coil. He raised the dagger high, and with every strength he could muster, plunged the dagger directly into Nehustan's flesh. Everything was still. The coil didn't even flinch. He stabbed it once more, and still nothing. Elliot looked back to me, but I was as perplexed as he was. He proceeded to rip a hole in the serpent's flesh, and immediately hundreds of the insects came skittering out of the muscle tissue. Nehustan was long dead, but apparently not long enough for the scavengers to decompose the body. It may have died as early as mere weeks ago. Elliot, not sure what to do, looked at me again. I stood up at ease. It's dead, I said. Elliot turned quickly back at Nehustan for fear it might come out and strike at the source of the sound. But it was indeed well and truly dead. He also stood up, relaxing somewhat. Let's get the crown, I reminded him. God is merciful and allowed Nehustan to die in peace before we arrived. Coming around the other side, I shined the flashlight on Nehustan's head. His eyes were pale and milky, flesh being eaten away by the millions of tiny bugs. They hardly paid us any mind, as they had yet to finish their snake buffet. Here it is, said Elliot, pointing to the sarcophagus behind the giant corpse. No more riddles? No more messages or tests? I asked. No, he said, just a stone slab between us and Adam. We hurriedly pushed on the lid and slid the sarcophagus open, revealing a surprisingly well-preserved, mummified Adam. Even more resplendent was the unblemished bronze circlet that adorned his head. This was the crown we strove so hard to find, and it was there before our very eyes. Take it, I said, it's yours. Just be careful, yeah? Elliot placed his hands on the crown and the room filled with light. As bright as any modern civilized living room, the insects scattering from Nehustan's corpse. Elliot ever so carefully removed the crown from Adam's head, and the circlet remained intact. We had done it. It was flawless. Turning to make our way back to the surface, we stopped short as Nehustan's head began to move. The dagger, Elliot, I warned. Perhaps we were prideful still to think the test was over. It turned out to be far different than we expected. Still fallen on the floor, Nehustan's mouth opened, as something was crawling out from it. a gelatinous form with thousands of tiny, quivering legs shifting its way out of the serpent's throat. In the light, there was no mistaking the completely alien horror that stood before us. Some abominable amalgamation of a snail and centipede stood erect, towering 7 feet above us, the sluggish body complete with short, digging mandibles and black carapaces lining its back seemed to drip down 2 stalks from its chin. The stalks opened to strange, unearthly-looking eyes that examined both of us. "Kill it! For God's sake, kill it!" I screamed. Elliot couldn't move. Paralyzed by the monster's gaze, I quickly grabbed the crown and motioned Elliot to leave. He remained transfixed. The creature twitched its mandibles, gurgling in a sandy tone that vaguely resembled maniacal chuckling. I grabbed Elliot by the hand. "Come on!" We ran, or rather I ran, dragging a dazed Elliot behind me. The passageways were beginning to dim. At last we came to the labyrinth. "All right, Elliot, I really need you right now. We can't leave without your help." Elliot looked at the ancient bones around the threshold to the labyrinth. He began to giggle. "They couldn't find a way out," Elliot laughed. "Go!" I yelled. "Follow the trail!" I pushed him into the labyrinth through the only path available thus far. "Trail?" Elliot asked, looking down at the floor. He let out a hard, throaty laugh. We made our way as far as we could, but the darkness made it impossible to see in front of us. There was nothing left for me to do but sit Elliot down in the dead end we found ourselves in. "Remember why we came here," I said, placing the crown in his hands. "We have it. You have it. All we need to do is reach the surface." "Just a stone slab between us and Adam," Elliot said softly. I heard a deft metallic snap just after he finished. "Oops," he said, then giggled maniacally. He placed the crown back in my hands, 2 broken pieces in each hand. I was speechless. No words, no rage, no sorrow. Only disbelief. Elliot murmured something in a language I had never heard before. Nothing I had ever heard on a God's green earth compared to the syllables and noises produced from his mouth. "Krzerk Krzas, Krzerk Vornish Denan, Talas Niricht Bitinin." Before we were utterly consumed in darkness, the last thing I saw was the crazed look in his eyes. "Gods feasting on gods," he said. He revealed the cosmos. The Holy Spirit was severed from my eyes. I slumped down in the horrid realization that we were trapped forever. "Hizis! Cherist! Hizis! Hizis!" Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Moonscouts. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to Camp Brightmoon. And don't forget to hit the little bell button so you don't miss any new videos. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those links will be in the description below. And we have a Camp Brightmoon Patreon page. So thank you so much again, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!